Going to Camp Blood, ain't ya? You'll never come back again. It's got a death curse. Hello, that's either my impression of Crazy Ralph or Steve Martin's impression of Crazy Ralph playing the jerk. I don't know. Anyway, that's some dialogue from Friday the 13th, 1980. Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate coming at you to review one of my favorite all-time motion pictures of all time, Friday the 13th, and unfortunately ever since 2009 we have to say 1980 after the title, which is a real bummer. The original Friday the 13th that came out in I want to say May of 1980. Actually, if the numbers they're telling us are correct, this movie actually did financially better than the Stanley Kubrick movie The Shining, which is kind of a travesty because obviously almost as much as I love Friday the 13th, I obviously would regard as The Shining as a better movie, and if you haven't seen my review of The Shining, feel free to check that out. What can I say about Friday the 13th? It's one of my all-time favorite movies of all time. First off the bat, the title is absolutely freaking perfect, and I'm surprised no one used it for a movie up until this point. Using the title Friday the 13th for a horror movie is absolutely perfect, and in a way, obviously this movie is a complete and total rip-off of Halloween, but I would regard Friday the 13th as, in many regards, as surpassing Halloween, and almost, it uses a title like Halloween that's just such a no-brainer that it's like, how come no one used that title yet? But to me, when I hear the title Friday the 13th, just my 12-year-old little boyness just gets zapped alive, and it invigorates me to like nothing you would ever imagine or believe. So having commented on the title being absolutely fantastic, whoever came up with let's segue over into the poster. The poster in my opinion is one of the all-time most classic, not only horror movie posters, one sheets of all time, but just I think it's just one of the best movie posters of all time. And I've got a couple reproductions of the poster. And luckily it's on the first DVD release that came out, but unfortunately after that, the original theatrical poster and subsequent DVD and Blu-ray releases has unfortunately kind of fallen by the wayside and is no longer being used. I think it's basically a tragedy that the poster is no longer being used, but of course it still doesn't mean it still doesn't exist. But the painting is, I don't know if there's a poster that invokes the feeling of a movie as well as the poster for the original Friday the 13th. Just that, and what I love about the whole poster being taken place inside the image of the kind of silhouetted killer is it's kind of like saying that these people, these people in the picture in the painting within the silhouette of the silhouetted killer are basically, they're not going to escape. That's kind of what it says to me. It's just like they can go wherever they want to go inside the silhouette of the killer, but they're not going to escape the killer. And the poster is just so frickin' amazing, and the way the font that was either used or created, and to do the title Friday the 13th, and the silhouetted killer holding like a real knife with blood on it, and then the poster going from black to white on the bottom half, and the red 24-hour Nightmare of Terror, and it's just one of the best posters in my opinion that was ever made for a movie. So now on to the review of the movie. There's not much I can say about this movie that I have a problem with. First off the bat, the location of the movie, which is of course the still functioning Camp Nobiscosko, or however the hell you pronounce the camp, and somewhere in Blairstown, New Jersey or whatever, was a absolute just perfect location for this movie. And I can't stress that enough. And one thing that I want to say about the movie that I love so much is the atmosphere. This movie has got just one of the most engrossing, relaxing, just absolutely fantastic atmospheres. And it should be said that if you're new to new to my channel or whatever, that I'm a huge fan of just basically the country settings and lake settings, and the exact, you know, location that this movie takes place in, that's my element. That's where I love to be the most. The country, the summertime. You know, I'm just so not a city guy, and in the location. The reason I love this movie so much is because it just captures so fantastically the beauty of the country, and the you know, the seclusionness. It really gives you the idea of the small town, you know, being secluded at this fantastically amazing summer camp, you know, kind of lake resort in the woods or whatever, is absolutely fantastic. And, you know, it's been obviously said that, you know, this is a complete and total ripoff of Halloween, but like I say, I mean, I think Friday the 13th completely surpasses Halloween, and I guess a lot of it is just because of the location. But what's interesting about this movie is, you know, I've always, even when I was a kid, I was always, maybe without really knowing it, you know, really liked the outdoors in the summer and the woods and stuff like that. But I don't know. I saw the Friday the Friday 13th movies when I was, you know, 12, and it's very possible that this movie and the other subsequent sequels like 2, 3, and well, I guess all of them take place in the woods. You know, the first 7 or whatever. It's very possible that these movies are part of the reason why I like the country and the lake setting so much, and it's really I really can't really separate it out. That's why these movies are so dear to me, because it's very possible that the combination of watching these movies at a young age is what really fostered in me the love for the kind of, you know, wood/lake environments that are featured so often in the first 7 movies. I mean, maybe if I never saw these movies, who knows, maybe I wouldn't really like the country lake/lake settings as much as I do. I mean, I don't know, but all I know is obviously that's probably the single biggest reason for me loving these movies so much, is just them being so rustic, and, you know, or at least the first 3 are kind of the more rustic of the bunch, where it's just like, it really has, or I guess I should say 2. The first 2 really have that, because they were real locations in the first 2 movies. They really have that sense of rustic realism and just being out in the country and out in the woods. And I don't know why the hell the Bill character says we're not in the woods. I've never understood that line in this movie when Alice says, haven't you ever been in the woods? And he's like, we're not in the woods. Well, where does he think they are? In the fucking middle of New York and Manhattan? I never understood that. Obviously, the way the beginning, you know, it's gonna be. I'm gonna really try my best. I'm not gonna do a beat by beat, but I will say, you know, the way the movie begins is really cool, with the, you know, back in the 50s or whatever, and the, you know, the point of view going through the cabins and stuff, and actually seeing that. It's really creepy, because at the very beginning, of course, we see the Mrs. Voorhees' point of view going through the cabin and seeing like the defenseless little kids laying in bed sleeping in the, you know, in the cabin, and it's just like, oh man, they're so defenseless. But obviously she, you know, we don't know at this time, but, you know, she doesn't have any beef with the campers. But it's really always, every time I watch it and seeing this, you know, killer who's, you know, basically going to kill a couple people right at that moment, you know, walking through this cabin of sleeping children is really, every time I watch it, it's just unsettling, because it's like, you know, if she wanted to, she could do whatever she wanted to these kids that, you know, at any given time. But obviously the setup of by having this, you know, this scene take place where, you know, this is not long after, I don't know if this is like 2 years or something after after her son was purported, of course, to have been drowned, because of course he didn't. That's something we'll get onto in part 2 review. But this, I think at the beginning of this movie, is this the first couple counselors she ever killed? It's possible. Obviously there's this, you know, these, you know, a couple where they get together to do some hanky panky. This boy presumably promises her the ride of her life. You know, with you know, what'd she say? Oh, you said you were special, and I meant everything. And you wonder, you know, what anyway, what he thinks he's got or whatever. But it's unfortunate that she never got to find out, or, you know, if he is in fact special or whatever. But the beginning of the movie is cool, where, you know, I would imagine it's her first killing of counselors back in the day, and, you know, basically And she has no qualms later on, of course, about killing people who aren't having sex, but obviously what really triggered her in the opening scene of this movie is the fact that these people were about to have sex. And then after that, obviously, it segues to, you know, one of the most, not only does this movie have one of the best titles, but one of the best posters, and then it has one of the best title sequences with the classic Friday the 13th coming at you, and then, you know, breaking the glass. It's just like, oh my god. I mean, even all these years later watching it, it's just so much cooler than most frickin' title scenes in movies now. I ever noticed so many movies in the 2000s and beyond, it's just like this stupid, boring, like, even the remake slash reboot, it's just like, Friday the 13th. You know, and it's just like they don't even bother trying to. I'm glad in a way that they didn't try to rip off the title of the first movie, because, you know, that way the title of this movie can be all the more special. But just the title, I mean, you know, breaking the glass, how cool is that? Oh my gosh! It's every time the title comes up with the music, I'm like, hell yeah, here we go, mama. And while I'm on the subject of the opening credits, of course, I mean, not that I could ever forget to mention Harry Manfredini. His contribution to these movies, or at least like the first 6 movies, is so huge and so important. I mean, I couldn't imagine. Once again, I think, however, you know, as cool as the music is for Halloween, I think obviously the music for this movie completely blows. You know, the music for, you know, from Halloween completely out of the water, in my opinion. If you're a Halloween fan and feel the opposite, I mean, that's more power to you. That's your right. But as a Friday the 13th fan, this is my particular take on the music. I mean, it's just so amazing, and it, for some reason, you know, this movie the music in this movie has always gone so well with the country slash lake slash camp setting. The music and whatever sounds that Harry Manfredini thought up, and just like the clang, you know, just the music. I mean, a lot of times, you know, although there's definitely a theme and a basic, you know, kind of a dun 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 dun, dun. I mean, it's definitely like music in the sense of having themes and stuff. But what's so great about the music throughout the kind of through the majority of the movie after the main title sequence is, it's kind of almost like, not so much, I mean, you would call it music, but it's almost this really fantastic, just you know, sound atmosphere, sound ambiance. I don't know how to really describe it, but all I know is the music in this movie, you know, and the subsequent movies as well, but this one in particular is just so freaking amazing, and and really enhances the location, or enhances what you see on the screen so much. You know, for me, in such a, like I say, I can't separate like country slash lake, you know, atmospheres in the, you know, this music. Like if I'm just out in the woods, I mean, I'll just be riding a bike or in a kayak, or, you know, in the water, and I'll just be like, ding, 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 you know, sometimes I've actually kayaked at dusk into the night with, you know, a little freaking Bluetooth speaker in the kayak with the soundtrack from this movie playing, and you know, it lasts for like a whole lap around the lake. And you should try that. Like, if you can get in a canoe or a kayak with a little Bluetooth speaker, and at dusk into night and on a lake, and have the music or the soundtrack from this movie playing, it's just so freaking cool, because it's like a freaking Friday the 13th theme park. It's like living, you know, it's like living the movie, or the best parts of it. You don't, luckily I haven't died yet doing that, but I mean, I'm just trying to say, I can't put it into words how amazing the music in this movie is. It's absolutely just phenomenal. One thing that's funny early on, something that I've always wondered for the last several years, is why the 2 Jeeps, you know? I mean, like, Steve Christy is this guy who's trying to, I can't remember if this lake was in his family's, you know, as a part of his family legacy, or if he inherited this camp or whatever. But you know, obviously ever since Jason drowned, this camp has been you know, trying to open, and, you know, Mrs. Voorhees, there's this, you know, mysterious source that would always kind of screw something up or sabotage it. We later obviously come to find out it's Mrs. Voorhees, the mom of the boy who was presumed to have drowned, screwing stuff up, poisoning the water, or just, you know, trying to burn the place down and stuff. So now Steve Christy in 1980, in the summer of 1980 or whatever, is gonna go for it again. He's gonna try to fix this place up and open it. And what's always weird to me towards the beginning of the movie, or the first half of this movie, is we were introduced to Jeep, or the Steve Christie's CJ7 or something like that, is Jeep, and it's like blue Jeep, and he drives away in that early on in the movie to go into town, and then later on we'll see basically the same Jeep. This one's got like the top up and the door, the kind of rag doors and the rag top on. And this particular Jeep picks up was it Annie, this hitchhiking character that was hitchhiking to go, to be a cook at Camp Crystal Lake. And I always wondered, was that an attempt by the filmmakers to try to make Steve, I mean, I can only assume that was just an attempt to make Steve look like the bad guy, some misdirection or whatever, because there's no other reason why you'd have these two characters have these same two vehicles, which is like the exact same color and stuff. So that was always something that maybe as a kid it never really occurred to me, but later on in my 20s and 30s I'm just like, what the hell's the deal with like these two Jeeps? Obviously it must be to try to make people think Steve's the killer, so then when it turns out to not be him, or when he dies or whatever, then it can just be like, oh man, I didn't see that coming. One of the many things about this movie that I would regard as being perfect, or very near perfect, is the pacing of this movie. I think it's absolutely fantastic. A lot of people now, people that, ADHD, or people that are 20 or younger, or maybe even in their 30s, whatever, people that are so used to the kind of overly fast bullshit that they put in movies now, where they don't even have time to think. I regard the pace, I'm getting up in years, so I saw this movie when it was, for the very first time, when it was what? It wasn't even 10 years old when I first saw this movie. I mean, the movie wasn't 10 years old, because I saw it for the first time in probably, so it was like 9 years old, the movie was. But in general, I just like, Stanley Kubrick movies, and I don't mind. I actually quite prefer slower paced movies, because they have a time to breathe, and you have a time to just let them in, and it's more of an organic. For me, slower movies are more of an organic experience, where they're just happening in front of you, kind of like life, and they're just, I guess they mirror life. The reason why I like them is maybe because they're more realistic, like your day-to-day life, because that's how life kind of plays out, very just at this kind of slow pace, or at least that's how my life plays out. But the pacing of this movie is absolutely perfect. A lot of people have said that for them it's boring or slow or whatever. Well, whatever, but to me the pacing of this movie is actually just basically perfect. And I said it, you can watch this review. I reviewed this movie with a buddy of mine 25 years ago, and I think that video is titled, like, I don't know, the Critics Horror Movie Reviews 1993. And I said this exact same thing 25 years ago, that everything that they show is, had to be shown for just the amount of time they showed it for, meaning that it's perfectly, conceived and executed, and like, the amount of them playing around on the dock and swimming and stuff is just right. The amount of them like preparing dinner is just right. Then we introduced the fact that they're gonna have to go on generator power, which is setting up something that'll come up later, of course, when Mrs. Voorhees goes into the thing and kind of disables the generator to plunge them into darkness. We'll also draw out Bill to come to the generator, cabin or whatever, so she could presumably kill him at that point. But the pacing is absolutely fantastic. I think this movie was just one of those rare occasions where, I mean, it happens a lot because there's so many movies being made, but one of these rare occasions where everything just came together with this movie is just like, oh my gosh, it's like perfect. Speaking more about that and just being paced perfectly and stuff, even after dinner and stuff, seeing just Jack and Marcy just kind of dicking around by the lake and just kissing and all this stuff, and seeing the lonesome Ned see them, and he goes off and kind of dies off camera. But gosh, when you see Ned, balancing on that thing and hopping around and walking over to where he's going to eventually die, take a look, especially if you're watching this on Blu-ray, take a look at the lake in that shot when he's balancing on that thing and whistling or whatever. The lake is so freaking just dead calm, like a mirror. It's so beautiful, and especially in high definition Blu-ray, this movie looks absolutely fantastic. But take a minute and just look at that, and even pause it if you want, It's just such a beautiful shot in that overturned kind of boat that's leaning against the boathouse or whatever. Just in HD, it just looks so, oh my gosh. I mean, like I say, this movie really puts me there and really makes me. It should be said that, you know, this camp, Nova Scotia, or whatever, however the hell you pronounce it, is my all-time #1 filming location that I'd want to visit. Unfortunately, now they're really clamped down on people who try to sneak in, you know, so you really can't do that as an option. One thing they do is group, they do this rather often where they have group visits and stuff like that. Well, I don't really want to do that, so it's probably not a place that I'll never get to visit, unfortunately, but I guess I can kind of revisit it every time I put the movie in. But yeah, you know, that's, if I could, you know, somehow go there and just, you know, see it by, you know, not with a freaking group, but kind of just by myself or with someone I'm with or whatever, that would be, this is, you know, the filming location for this movie is my all-time #1 filming location I'd like to visit, because, like I say, the location in this movie is just one of the all-time, just most awesome filming locations ever. And again, I think that one of the reasons why it's captured so fantastically is just the meandering, you know, the pace of this movie, which is a good pace, and just, you know, long takes on shots, and not all this close up on people's faces so you can't even see the background. Just the way it's shot and cut really lends to showing, you know, really letting the location really flourish on screen. It's absolutely fantastic. So what's really cool, another thing that really lends to the atmosphere of this movie is, of course, the thing that I love in real life as well. And again, maybe I love it in real life because of these movies, I don't know. But, you know, storms and rain and storms. I don't like severe storms, those are scary. But, you know, just rain with a little bit of thunder and lightning is really cool and relaxing and stuff. But as the night approaches in this movie, you know, Jack and Marcy kind of run into shelter as it's getting darker and pardon me, the storm's coming and stuff. And what's really cool about this scene, which just seems so nonchalant and just relaxing, and they're just going to make a little love, is, you know, later on, and then, you know, of course the other, whatever his name is, the other three and the other three in the other cabin are doing the strip Monopoly. Then they're getting down and dirty into making some love. And then what's so creepy about the scene is when the camera goes up to on the top of the, you know, freaking bunk bed, and you see Ned's, and it's actually cool because when I watched it, I just rewatched this again, and, you know, you see Ned disappear into the cabin, and it's just like, oh man, you kind of wish, you know, you could see him die. But I think the way they do it in the movie is better, because he just disappears, and then when you see him, because you don't necessarily know he dies. I mean, you probably think he's gonna. But so I think the way, because when you see him on top of the, you know, the bunk bed or whatever, the throat slit, it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of a better way to actually show the body on top of the lovers, because you see that not only is he in fact dead, but he's also, you know, having them, you know, making a little love while there's a corpse frickin' right above them is just so frickin' creepy. And of course, as it's already been said in making ofs and stuff, it's a fantastic misdirection where, you know, keeping your eyes and your thoughts above them, and then to have the Mrs. Voorhees, you know, the violence come from below, and Jack is famously plunged through with the arrow and stuff. And luckily now, finally in the, you know, the Blu-ray, we actually finally get to see the uncut version, the full uncut version, which many would argue kind of looks fakey. And yeah, the front angle view of him, you know, dying does look, especially with the kind of different coloring of the fake neck and body, does look a little more, I guess, a little more fakey than just having that scene not, or having that shot not be seen as it was in the North American R-rated version. But whatever, I'm still glad we get to see it finally. It's funny when the rain, when Brenda realizes that she left her windows in her cabin open, and she goes basically in just her underwear with a rain jacket on. And she, you know, Alice was just about to take off her blouse, and what's really weird, and I've always wondered with the last several years, is, you know, Brenda leans over towards Alice, like, just when it was getting interesting, and it's almost like, does Brenda have a thing for Alice? Like, that was kind of weird. What do you think? For me, although I love every frickin' minute of this movie, halfway through or whatever, right around the halfway mark of the movie, when, you know, this is basically when Jack and Marcy are starting to die, the movie, even though it's been perfect up until that point, for me, rewatching it just recently, hits a really great stride, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it almost like the pacing that was perfect from the very beginning for me, it almost seems to even be getting to even get better somehow halfway through the movie, where we set up characters and we have them just kind of linger around and do this and that, and finally we get to the point. Not that not that the movie is boring by any stretch of the imagination for me, but once we get to the point where this one by one being dispatched, it's just like, oh my gosh, I loved this movie before this is happening, and now that it's happening, it's just so cool, and kind of like the 1-2 punch where Marcy gets off relatively quick after Jack, which is really kind of cool, and the music that Harry Manfredini does when Mrs. Voorhees enters the bathroom building, and it's just, oh my God, this movie, I just love it. And then Marcy hearing a noise and thinking it's Jack, and the suspense of like creeping into the bathroom whatever stalls and looking for him, and then the axe coming up, and now finally uncut we get to see kind of a lingering shot of Marcy fall out of the frame with the axe embedded in her face. I mean, oh my gosh, I just love this movie. So after seeing 2 relatively gruesome on-screen kills, then we're going to dispatch Brenda in a scene that's off-screen, which at this point a lot of times I wonder, every time I watch it, I'm like, well, it would have been really easy to actually show her being dead. And having read the novelization, of course, well, we actually get to experience in the novelization how Nettie dies, I think, with, obviously the throat being slit. But in the novelization, it says that, I can't remember, I think she gets shot by, if not 2, possibly 3 arrows. Of course, Brenda being, already having been set up, having a connection with the archery range when she was setting it up, she kind of ends up returning back to the archery range in this scene where she's reacting in a rainstorm at night to this voice calling out from the darkness, like, help me! And what's really creepy about that voice is, obviously for the purposes of making the movie, it's probably some little girl for real. It sounds like a little girl, maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 or 11 years old or something like that. And what's really creepy is, it's kind of like, is Mrs. Voorhees supposed to be doing that voice, or does she actually have like a young girl victim to call out to make that voice? That's something as a viewer I've always wondered, and it's kind of cool because it just leaves it to your imagination. I think we're meant to assume that Mrs. Voorhees is just making that voice herself, but for the purposes of the movie you can tell it's not. There's no way that Betsy Palmer could actually make that voice, and it is in fact a young kid, and probably a young girl, I would imagine. But that scene is really creepy because that voice draws Brenda out into the wet, darkness, into over to the archery range for her demise. But what I was getting at is, the novelization show, she's obviously, when Mrs. Voorhees turns on the lights at the archery range, she's obviously standing right and kind of in the line of fire, and kind of not directly in front, but kind of in front of where the targets are. And when you watch it, it is a little bit of a bummer because it would have been relatively easy just to do with cuts showing her being impaled by a couple arrows or whatever, and to actually show it on camera. But the way it's handled with just cutting away just to a scream is done well in its own right as well. But Brenda's death, although it is off camera, is really, really cool. Just luring her out into the rainstorm in the dark of night to dispatch her. That scene is always, well, I love every second of this movie. But that scene I like as well. So later on, towards the end of the movie, after everyone but Bill and Alice are dispatched, they're kind of starting to wonder what the hell's going on and where everyone is. And a really cool scene for me, I think, is just really subtly creepy, is when they go into Brenda's cabin and they see, the bloody axe in the bed, laying on the pillow. That's just, oh man, how can you not love that? That is just so cool. And just to know that, the killer just, took it out of Marcy's face and put it on the bed, and just like, that image is just so cool, the bloody axe on the pillow. It's kind of like, I don't know, reverse Tooth Fairy or something, I don't know. Tooth Monster. Then of course, somewhere around this time, Mrs. Voorhees goes into the generator cabin and disables, we don't know what the hell she does to the generator, but disables it, which, lures Bill out into the night to go try to fix it. Cutting away to Alice. We see her wake up, and I love how this scene where she's preparing coffee for, starting to prepare coffee for her and Bill, they just do it in one shot. This isn't just something you just never see in a movie now, and this shot just goes on and on and on. But by the time she takes a breath and kind of sighs on her way out of camera, that she's just getting anxious, and that Bill's not returning. And what's so cool is she goes out now the storm having passed at this point, she goes out towards the generator cabin, and I think it's just so cool when she discovers Bill's body. It's just like, oh man, it's just freaking nailed up on the the wooden door of the generator cabin, and just freaking destroyed utterly. Arrows everywhere in the groin and the neck and the eye. I think his throat slit. It's just like, bleh. I mean, that image. I mean, I'm not a sicko in real life. I don't like real life violence, but horror movie violence is really kind of fun, and just that image of him just utterly destroyed up against the door is just so cool. And oh my gosh. Another scene that I always thought was fantastically atmospheric and really cool is the scene where Steve, basically hikes back to the cabin after the rainstorm at night, and approaches the sign and is meted by basically the killer at this point, and we don't really know who it is, but for a first-time viewer, and even when you watch it in subsequent viewings, you can kind of see, or see it through the first-time viewer's eyes, like, oh my gosh, there's a killer shining a flashlight in his eyes. And then at one point when he gets closer to the killer, he's like, recognizes the killer. Oh, hi, what are you doing out in this mess? So that, and then stabbed in the stomach with a knife or something like that. I mean, that really makes you wonder, like, oh my gosh, he knew the killer. Who the hell could this killer be? But I mean, at this point, obviously I could go on and on and on, and I already have gone on and on about this movie. I should probably cut this review off now, as difficult as it is, because being one of my favorite movies, I could probably talk about it for 6 hours straight. But yeah, Friday 13th, obviously, you know what, I'm going to give this movie 5 stars out of 4 stars. That's how much I love Friday 13th, 1980. It's absolutely a fantastic powerhouse, up until the point, where, then she, with this grand crescendo of finding Bill's body, and then having this woman come to her aid, and slowly through that woman's story, the woman being of course Mrs. Voorhees, we realize that this is the killer. And it's really cool at the time, and even now or any time, that you wouldn't necessarily think it's the killer when she appears, because she's a little middle-aged woman or whatever. But having the killer be a middle-aged woman was really, 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 really cool. And obviously Betsy Palmer, in doing a role, reluctantly doing a role so she could get 10 grand to buy a new car or have her car fixed or whatever the story, however the story goes, doing this movie she assumes the movie's going to come and go and no one's going to remember her for it, turns out to be probably the single biggest movie that she's remembered for, which is the ultimate irony. I think that a lot of people would agree with that. I mean, holy cow. But I think she embraced it as the years went on, and definitely, appreciated the fans as the years went on. So I think it all worked out in that regard. But Betsy Palmer, in the last part of the movie where she's Mrs. Voorhees and goes crazy, although some of her, obviously not being probably that physical of a person, obviously by today's standards, some of her limited physical ability in the fight scene with Alice and stuff is a little, it makes you laugh. It makes for a good time, and stuff like that, where she's like, she's, I don't know, there's one part where she goes, she sure tries to stab Alice with the broken end of the oar, and when she's lying on the ground, it looks like she's like struggling with the half of the oar or whatever. So, during their final battle, there's a few moments there that are kind of like funny, and scenes where it's just like she's almost seems surprised that Alice is, resisting her killing her, like why are you throwing stuff at me or resisting? All the other people she kind of killed by surprise and got the jump on them. This one, it's kind of, she's harder to kill because has to actually fight her. And they even make it realistic by having a realistic outcome. The battle versus older woman versus younger woman ends in a way that you would probably assume it would, and how fantastic that Mrs. Voorhees comes at Alice with a machete, the weapon that will end up becoming her son's kind of signature weapon in the future. only at some point during the the confrontation to lose the machete, and at some point they get separated during the battle. Alice, right over by the machete, picks it up in a grand finale climax in a slow motion scene. Mrs. Voorhees recovers from the battle, or the little bit of a scuffle they had on the ground, as to see Alice coming at her in slow motion with the machete raised high, and Mrs. Voorhees reaction. And what a glorious way to off the killer in this movie, kind of, in a way, not that I'd call it my favorite kill of the movie, but it's kind of definitely one of the, probably the most, in a way they save kind of the best kill kind of for last, in a the decapitation of the vengeful killer, kind of a fitting end for Mrs. Voorhees in a lot of ways. Definitely, probably in 1980, a very shocking kind of thing to see happen on screen right in front of everyone's eyes, the decapitation. And now in the uncut version in North America, of course, we have, we're able to linger on the neck pumping blood, and the Tom Savini's assistant's hands coming up into the frame with the hairy knuckles, adding a little bit of realism to that scene. So that scene's really cool. And if you think the movie, at this point the movie has already just delivered just, troves and troves of just, entertainment value, and just sick, nasty, killings of people and stuff like that. But now it does this really cool thing where at the end of the movie, Alice, or after decapitating Mrs. Voorhees, Alice goes, probably what she should have done, actually, as soon as she escaped Mrs. Voorhees the first time, is get in a canoe and just paddle out to the middle of the lake. But whatever, she waits until after she kills her to do this. She gets in a canoe out, goes out into the middle of the lake in the middle of the night, to kind of, a very safe place, or so she thinks. That's what's so great about this scene. It transitions to day, and I must say the music, Harry Manfredini's music in this scene, the next day, the next morning scene with her in the canoe, and combined with the absolutely beautiful photography of the, her, and that just iconic image of Alice in the canoe the next morning, tattered clothes, hanging over the side of the canoe. Absolutely fantastic. Obviously they milk this and milk this and milk this until the fantastic moment where she thinks everything's fine, the police have arrived, she's saved, she lives, and then at the last moment we see, in a very, probably, it'd be so great to see video footage of the, some of the first screenings of this movie with the packed theater, and the reaction was probably just insane. Young Jason Voorhees comes splashing out of Crystal Lake to, wrap his arm around Alice and pull her under, in a scene that just, probably just shocked moviegoers in 1980 to no end, only just moments later to have Alice wake up from that nightmare and find out that everyone but her had been killed that night. Unfortunately, the whole thing wasn't a dream. Just the what's cool about that bit where young Jason pulls her out of the lake, obviously it's played as being a dream because of the information she got from Mrs. Voorhees. But what's cool about it is you don't necessarily know if it did happen or not, which is kind of cool. I think, like I say, the filmmakers probably intended it to be just a dream, but as a viewer you could say it goes either way. Like the Brenda death, and the voice that lures her out into the night. So, oh my gosh. So then the movie ends with this, just, I forgot to mention, but I'll mention it right now, that Adrienne King is just a fantastic, absolutely classic final girl in this movie. And the last shot of her we see is just one of the most amazing shots, in a Friday the 13th movie. Just this insanely ridiculous close-up that just, oh my gosh, what a great shot of, closing out shot of Adrienne King at the end of this movie. And that great line where she's like, "We never found any boy," and then he's still there, and the look then she turns towards the camera and just looks, and just like, oh my gosh. So once again, I mean, all these things that I've mentioned in this incredibly lengthy review are just basically, obviously loving basically every second, every millisecond of this movie. It's hard not to go on and on and on. Well, I guess I've already done that, but what I was saying is it's hard not to even go on further, but alas, I don't think I shall. Absolute powerhouse of a movie, one of my favorite all-time movies, something that I have no problem watching over and over and over and over again. So I guess that'll be my review of Friday the 13th. Screw it, I'm just going to say that title, Friday the 13th. I'm not going to put the year on the end of it because that's how it is, that's how the movie came out. Oh my gosh, I love this movie. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, we'll catch you on the next movie review.